The village of Winmore sat on the edge of a forest that seemed to breathe with shadows. Its crooked streets were lined with stone cottages whose windows glimmered faintly in the cold sunlight, and the wind carried whispers of old curses and broken promises. Among the villagers lived a small, quiet girl named Elara, who was only 8 years old. Her days were filled with chores, the sharp sting of hunger, and the cold indifference of a family that cared more for gold than love. Her uncle, a greedy and bitter man, had always looked at her with calculating eyes. To him, Elara was not a niece, not a child of his own flesh, but a coin to be spent. And one rainy evening, when the sky wept dark tears upon the village, he sold her for a handful of silver to a traveling merchant whose carriage creaked like the bones of the dead. Elara did not understand the meaning of betrayal at first. She only knew that her world had shifted, that the warmth of home had vanished like smoke, and that she was being carried far from everything familiar. The merchant's eyes glinted with a strange light, and his words were both soothing and cold. "Fear not, child," he said. "You will see wonders and learn truths that others cannot imagine." But his voice held no comfort. The journey to the distant city was long and bitter. Elara watched forests blur into mountains, and rivers wind like silver snakes through dark valleys. The nights were colder than she had ever known, and she huddled in a corner of the carriage, clutching the small cloth doll her mother had made for her. She whispered to it, promising she would return one day. When they arrived, the city was unlike anything Elara had seen. Towers rose like jagged teeth into a sky veiled by smoky clouds, and the streets were crowded with people who spoke in voices that hissed like wind through dead leaves. Magic pulsed faintly in the air, and shadows seemed to have life of their own. Here, wealth and influence were measured, not by kindness or courage, but by fear and cunning. Elara was taken to a grand mansion where the merchant served a master whose name was spoken in hushed tones. Lord Maltharion, a man whose very presence seemed to bend the air with power. He was known to collect children with special gifts, training them to become instruments of influence in his dark court. At first, Elara faced cruelty beyond her young imagination. She was forced to endure endless lessons, strange rituals, and the sharp sting of humiliation. Yet, even in the depths of her despair, a spark within her refused to die. She discovered that she could sense the faint energy around people, the way emotions shifted like currents in a river. She began to learn, in secret, how to bend these currents to her will, how to make her small voice carry weight, and her presence command attention. Years passed, and Elara transformed. The timid child who had once trembled at the sound of her uncle's voice became a young woman whose eyes burned with quiet fire. Her magic had grown stronger, subtle but unyielding. She had learned not just survival, but power. The power to inspire loyalty, to sow fear, and, if necessary, to strike without warning. Yet despite her growing strength, the past haunted her. The memory of the betrayal, of being sold for a handful of silver, was a shadow that followed her in every reflective surface, in every whispered conversation. Ilara's heart was a storm of emotions. Anger simmered beneath her calm exterior. But she also felt a strange longing not just for revenge, but for understanding. How could a world be so cruel and yet hold such beauty? How could a child survive and yet dream of becoming more than a victim? She wrote these thoughts in a small journal, hidden beneath the floorboards of her chamber, a place where her feelings could breathe safely. One evening, the city celebrated a festival in honor of the ruling family, a display of wealth and power so extravagant it made Ilara's chest tighten with both awe and disgust. The streets glowed with lanterns, music filled the air, and people laughed, unaware of the suffering that lay beneath the polished surface. Elara, dressed in simple dark robes that hid her form, moved through the crowd like a shadow. She observed the wealthy and the powerful, noting who feared whom, who whispered secrets, and who carried hidden knives behind silk sleeves. It was in this crowd that she first saw him. A knight known only as Sir Kale. A man of imposing stature and quiet presence. His armor gleamed faintly in the lantern light, and his eyes carried the weight of battles fought and victories won. He seemed not to notice her. Yet when their gazes met for a fleeting moment, a spark of recognition passed between them, as if some unspoken truth had been exchanged. Elara's attention was soon drawn away by a scene that chilled her blood. A group of children, orphans taken in by the court, were being led to a ritual meant to display loyalty to Lord Maltharion. Fear twisted their small faces, and they trembled beneath the ornate robes of their captors. Without thinking, Elara moved toward them, her heart pounding. She raised her hand subtly, and a wave of her energy shifted the emotions of the men who guarded the children. They hesitated, their certainty faltering, just long enough for the children to escape into the shadows. The crowd gasped, whispers spreading like wildfire. None could see her clearly, only that a shadow had passed among them, leaving awe and fear in its wake. That night, Elara retreated to her chamber, her body trembling from exertion, her mind racing with the realization she no longer had to be a passive observer. She had power now, power that could change the world, power that could reclaim what had been stolen from her. Yet even as her resolve hardened, doubts lingered. Could she truly rise above the girl who had been sold for silver? Could she become someone who inspired loyalty, not just fear? The questions gnawed at her, but in their place, determination grew. She would not be a pawn. She would be a queen, not merely in title, but in essence. Weeks passed in preparation. Elara honed her abilities, blending strategy with subtle magic, learning to read people as one reads an open book. The merchant who had brought her here occasionally visited, unaware that the timid girl he had first encountered had become something far more formidable. She treated him with polite respect, masking the storm beneath her calm exterior. Yet in the quiet moments of the night, she plotted. Every lesson, every observation, every whispered secret in the hallways of the mansion was a piece of the path she was forging for herself. It was during a stormy night, lightning slicing the sky, that Elara's moment came. Lord Maltharion had summoned his most trusted nobles for a demonstration of loyalty, a ritual that had always ended in fear and subjugation. Elara slipped into the hall unseen, her presence a shadow in the flickering candlelight. The nobles were gathered around a raised platform where a young apprentice trembled, awaiting punishment for a minor mistake. Elara stepped forward, her voice calm but carrying a resonance that made the hall fall silent. "No one should tremble for the mistakes of youth," she said. A hush fell over the room, and even Lord Maltharion's sharp eyes narrowed in surprise. She lifted her hands slightly, and a faint shimmer of energy wove through the air, bending the perception of the nobles. Suddenly, the apprentice was surrounded not by fear, but by an aura of safety and courage. Gasps and whispers filled the hall. Elara realized, with a thrill and a pang of fear, that she had done what she had thought impossible. She had changed the currents of power in that moment, bending not just fear, but hope, and commanding attention without a single sword drawn. The nobles exchanged uneasy glances, unsure whether to admire her or fear her, while Maltharion's eyes burned with both intrigue and suspicion. When the assembly ended, Elara slipped into the night, the rain mingling with her tears and the fire of determination in her heart. She walked the streets of the city, feeling both small and enormous, carrying the weight of her past and the possibilities of her future. She understood something fundamental. She no longer needed to hide. The girl who had been sold for silver had grown into a young woman who could command attention, who could wield power without cruelty, and who could choose the path of justice rather than vengeance. The chapter of her childhood had ended, but the story of her rise was only beginning. Somewhere beyond the darkened streets, whispers of her deeds began to circulate, whispers that spoke of a shadow moving through the city, a force of both fear and awe. And somewhere, in the corridors of power, eyes turned toward the distant mansion, sensing the presence of someone who would not be ignored. Elara paused on a hill overlooking the city, lightning illuminating her determined face. She raised her hand to the stormy sky, feeling the energy that coursed through her. Not just magic, but the heartbeat of her own destiny. She whispered to herself, a vow wrapped in both longing and promise. I will return. I will claim what is mine, and no one will ever break me again. In that moment, she felt it. The first stirrings of a destiny far greater than survival. A path that would take her from the shadows of betrayal to the throne of power. And as the storm raged on, the city below seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the Alpha Queen to emerge. The city had not yet forgotten the shadow that moved through its streets the night of the storm. Whispers of a mysterious force began to circulate among nobles, merchants, and guards alike. Yet no one had seen her clearly, only glimpsed a shadow, a flicker of movement, a sudden shift in the currents of fear and respect. That shadow was Elara, no longer a frightened child, but a young woman whose mind was sharp as steel and whose heart had learned the weight of betrayal and endurance. Elara moved among the city's elite with careful precision. She wore the guise of a noblewoman, recently arrived from a distant land, her hair hidden beneath silks, and her eyes veiled by a mask of quiet confidence. Few could see past the beauty and mystery she projected, and fewer still suspected the power that simmered beneath her calm exterior. Her first days were spent observing. She attended court meetings, listened to the whispers of ministers and generals, and noted the alliances that twisted through the city like threads in a tapestry. Everyone sought favor with Lord Maltharion, and everyone underestimated her. That, she realized, was her greatest advantage. Among the nobles, one figure stood out, Sir Kale, the knight she had glimpsed years ago during the festival. His presence was commanding, his loyalty to the crown unquestioned. And yet there was something in his gaze that spoke of curiosity, of questions that could not easily be answered. When their eyes met across the crowded hall during a council meeting, Elara felt a strange pull, a recognition that neither time nor distance could erase. She turned away, letting her mask of composure hide the stirrings within her. Elara's days were a careful dance of influence. She offered guidance to those who would listen, subtly shaping decisions, planting seeds of ideas that would bloom only when the moment was right. Her nights, however, were devoted to preparation. In the quiet of her chambers, she honed her magical abilities, practicing control over the subtle energies that allowed her to influence emotions, sway thoughts, and command attention without force. Each spell, each practice, brought her closer to the power she had dreamed of as a child, yet tempered with wisdom born of pain. It was during one of these nights that she received a secret message. A young noblewoman, loyal to no one but herself, had information about a hidden network within the city, people who were dissatisfied with Lord Maltharion's rule, who were willing to risk everything for change. Elara understood immediately. These were the allies she needed, the first threads in a web she would weave to reclaim her destiny. The meeting was arranged in the dead of night, beneath the arches of an abandoned courtyard. Elara arrived, her figure cloaked in shadows, and the young noblewoman stepped forward. "You are bold," she whispered, "to seek allies when everyone fears you." "I am no longer afraid," Elara replied, her voice steady. "And neither should they be. We can change this city, but only if we act with both courage and care. Are you willing?" "Oh." The noblewoman nodded, eyes wide with both fear and hope. "I am. Thus began the first stage of Elara's rise. She moved carefully, building alliances in secret, gaining the loyalty of those who had been overlooked or oppressed. Her influence spread like a quiet wind, shifting the balance of power without ever showing its full strength. And yet, despite her growing command, Elara felt a tension within her heart, a longing she did not fully understand. She had survived betrayal, hunger, and cruelty, and she had learned to wield power. But in the quiet moments, she felt the pull of something deeper, something that called not to her ambition, but to her heart. Sir Kael was a constant presence in these moments, though she could not let him know the full truth of who she had become. He watched the city with vigilant eyes, his loyalty unwavering. Yet he found himself drawn to the quiet, mysterious figure who seemed to understand the currents of the court better than anyone else. Their paths crossed often, sometimes in council chambers, sometimes in the shadowed halls of the palace. Each encounter was a dance of restraint and recognition, of unspoken questions and faint sparks of connection. One evening, during a grand masquerade held in the palace, Elara made her next move. The hall was filled with nobles, dressed in glittering masks, their voices blending with music and laughter. Elara moved like a shadow among them, her presence unnoticed but potent. She had learned of a plot to seize power from Lord Maltharion, orchestrated by a coalition of nobles who believed themselves cleverer than they truly were. The scheme would have plunged the city into chaos, with innocent lives caught in the crossfire. Elara acted swiftly. Using her abilities, she subtly influenced the conspirators, planting seeds of doubt, twisting their plans into confusion. The moment of betrayal came, and the nobles found themselves entangled in their own schemes, unsure whom to trust. From the shadows, Elara watched, her heart steady but her pulse quick with the thrill of control. By the time the masquerade ended, the conspirators had been exposed, humiliated before the court, and Elara's hand in the events remained invisible. It was then that Sir Kael approached her, his eyes narrowed with suspicion and awe. "Who are you?" he asked softly, the question carrying both challenge and fascination. Elara smiled faintly, her mask of composure unbroken. "Someone who walks where shadows fall," she said, "and someone who believes this city can be better than it is." He studied her, as if trying to unravel the mystery she presented, and for a moment, the tension between them was almost tangible. There was curiosity, admiration, and the faintest trace of something more, trust, perhaps, or the stirrings of a bond that neither fully understood. Elara looked away first, letting the moment pass, but the connection lingered like a whisper in the wind. The months that followed were a delicate balance of strategy and subtle influence. Elara continued to expand her network of allies, always careful to remain unseen, yet increasingly central to the city's unfolding events. She discovered secrets of the court, hidden debts, long-forgotten pacts, and the vulnerabilities of those who thought themselves untouchable. Every revelation was a piece of the puzzle, a step toward the throne she was destined to claim. Yet even as her power grew, so did the shadows of her past. The merchant who had first purchased her for silver remained a presence she could not ignore. Rumors suggested he had ties to Lord Maltharion, that his influence reached deeper than anyone realized. Elara knew that confronting him would be inevitable. She began to gather information discreetly, tracing his movements and learning his methods, preparing for the moment when the past and present would collide. It was during a night of storms, much like the one that had marked her childhood, that the first true test of her power arrived. A minor rebellion had broken out in the outskirts of the city, led by a faction seeking to challenge Lord Maltharion's authority. The rebellion was poorly planned but dangerous, threatening to destabilize the fragile balance Elara had worked so hard to maintain. She rode to the city gates under the cover of rain, her cloak soaked and her hair plastered to her face. The rebels were fierce, their anger fueled by years of neglect and fear. But Elara's presence, calm and commanding, shifted the tide. With careful words, subtle gestures, and the quiet force of her energy, she turned their anger into confusion, their loyalty into hesitation. By the time the city's guards arrived, led by Sir Kael, the rebellion had crumbled, not with bloodshed, but with the power of influence and strategy. Sir Kael watched her with awe and a hint of fear. "You have changed the course of events without a sword," he said. "Who are you, truly?" Elara met his gaze, her eyes steady. "Someone who will ensure this city survives and thrives," she said. Someone who knows that true power comes not from fear alone, but from understanding and strength. The knight nodded slowly, realizing that the young woman before him was no ordinary noble or courtier. She was a force, a storm in human form, and the city itself seemed to acknowledge her rising presence. Yet even in her victory, Elara felt the pull of something unresolved. Her past, her family, the uncle who had betrayed her, these shadows lingered, and she knew they would demand confrontation in time. The days that followed saw her influence solidify. Nobles whispered her name in reverence and fear, while the people of the city began to see her as a symbol of hope. Yet amidst this rise, the connection between her and Sir Kale deepened. They were allies, cautious and deliberate, yet each encounter carried the weight of unspoken emotions. Trust and longing intertwined, creating tension that neither could fully name, and in the quiet moments, each wondered what might happen if the other truly understood the whole truth of who they were. And then, on a night when the moon hung full and silver over the city, the first clear sign of the past returned. The merchant who had sold her as a child appeared in the streets, his presence cloaked in secrecy, but unmistakable. He moved with the knowledge that he still held power, and yet, in the shadows, Elara watched, her eyes sharp, her heart steady. The moment she had prepared for, the confrontation that would test her strength and resolve, was finally approaching. She felt the stirrings of something she had long ignored, not fear, but anticipation. The city had witnessed her rise, and soon it would witness the reckoning of her past. The merchant's presence was a reminder that power alone was not enough. Wisdom, courage, and strategy would be needed to face what was coming. Elara turned away from the window, her mind already racing. She would face the past, protect the present, and shape the future. The Alpha Queen was emerging, not just as a title, but as a force of destiny. And somewhere, in the quiet corners of the city, Sir Kale would stand beside her, whether she wished it or not, drawn into the storm that was about to engulf them all. The city slept uneasily under a sky heavy with clouds, the distant rumble of thunder echoing through its streets like a warning. Elara stood at the balcony of her temporary residence, gazing over the sprawling rooftops. The city had changed, though not yet fully aware of it. Whispers of her deeds had spread through the noble courts and the alleys alike. She was no longer a shadow. She was a presence, commanding, inevitable, and unstoppable. But despite her rising power, the return of the merchant, the man who had purchased her as a child, hung like a dark cloud over her thoughts. He had arrived not as a beggar seeking mercy, but as a player in a dangerous game, with knowledge and influence that threatened to destabilize all she had built. Elara had spent countless nights preparing for this moment, refining her magic, strategizing her moves, and gathering loyal allies who understood that survival required both courage and cunning. Her gaze shifted to Sir Kale, standing silently by her side. His armor glinted faintly in the muted light of the storm, and his eyes reflected both awe and concern. He had followed her rise with loyalty and fascination. Yet he remained cautious, aware that Elara's power, as extraordinary as it was, came with shadows of its own. "Do you think he will come tonight?" he asked, his voice low but steady. Elara turned to him, her expression calm yet fierce. "He will. And when he does, we will see if power belongs to those who wield it, or those who understand it." The city's streets below were unusually quiet, the usual bustle replaced by an eerie stillness. The merchant had not moved openly, but the signs were clear. Subtle shifts in loyalty, whispers in corridors, eyes watching from the shadows. Elara knew that every step she had taken to consolidate power was about to be tested. As the first drops of rain began to fall, the merchant appeared at the city gates, flanked by shadowy figures loyal to no one but him. His eyes, sharp and calculating, scanned the city, and for the first time, Elara allowed herself a small smile. This confrontation had been inevitable, and she was ready. With Sir Kale at her side, she descended into the city streets, moving with a grace that was both commanding and purposeful. Citizens and guards alike gave way, sensing the presence of someone who carried authority not from title alone, but from the very force of will. The confrontation occurred in the central square, under the faint light of torches flickering against the rain. The merchant stepped forward, his expression one of recognition and surprise. "So, the girl I once bought has grown into this," he said, his voice both incredulous and tinged with respect. Ilara's eyes burned with the fire of years spent in preparation. "I am no longer the girl you sold," she said. "I am Ilara, Alpha Queen of this city, and you will see that silver cannot purchase destiny." The merchant laughed softly, but it held no warmth. "Silver never did buy you," he admitted, "but influence, knowledge, fear, those can still bind you. Are you ready to see which will win?" A subtle pulse of energy radiated from Ilara, bending the emotions of the crowd, instilling courage in her allies and hesitation in her adversaries. The merchant, though powerful, had not anticipated that the girl he once underestimated had grown into a master of both strategy and subtle magic. The battle that followed was not of swords alone, but of minds and wills. Allies of the merchant attempted to seize control of the city's gates, but were met with the quiet, commanding presence of those loyal to Ilara. Her strategies, her preparations, and her ability to read the currents of emotion and fear turned the tide before any physical confrontation could escalate. Sir Kale moved beside her, striking with precision when needed, but always in concert with her plans, never in opposition. Throughout the confrontation, Ilara felt the full weight of her past. Every moment of betrayal, every night of hunger, every whispered insult from those who had underestimated her, fueled her resolve. Yet even in her fury, she held back, choosing wisdom over vengeance. When the merchant finally faced her directly, his power was formidable, but so was hers. "You could have been my pawn," he said, frustration in his eyes. "You could have taken nothing, and yet commanded everything through fear. Why did you choose this?" Ilara's gaze softened, but did not waver. "Because I am not a pawn," she said, "and because true power lies not in fear, but in understanding, in strength, and in mercy. I have chosen to rise above the past, and in doing so, I reclaim not only my destiny, but the honor of this city." The merchant hesitated, recognizing that the girl he once bought had become something far greater than he could control. With a final, almost reluctant bow, he withdrew, vanishing into the shadows of the city. The storm began to clear, the first rays of moonlight illuminating the square, and a sense of calm settled over the city. Sir Kale stepped forward, his expression a mixture of admiration and relief. "You have done it," he said softly. "You have faced the past and claimed what is yours. The city is yours." Ilara turned to him, her eyes reflecting both triumph and vulnerability. "It is not just mine," she said. "It belongs to those who believe in something greater than fear, to those who choose courage over cruelty." In the days that followed, Ilara worked to solidify her rule. She met with nobles, merchants, and citizens alike, establishing laws that valued justice, fairness, and wisdom. The city began to transform under her guidance. Its people, sensing the presence of a leader who wielded power not with cruelty, but with understanding. Amidst the responsibilities of leadership, her bond with Sir Kale deepened. They worked together, shared strategies, and slowly allowed themselves to acknowledge the connection that had been growing since their first encounters. It was a quiet, steady affection, forged in the fires of shared struggle and mutual respect. Neither rushed, for both understood the delicate balance of power and emotion that had brought them together. Yet even in moments of triumph, The past lingered in subtle ways. Ilara's uncle, now old and frail, had returned to the city, seeking forgiveness and hoping for mercy. He had seen her rise, her power, and the respect she commanded, and he trembled at the sight. Ilara met him not with vengeance, but with measured justice. She ensured that he faced the consequences of his actions, yet spared him destruction. In doing so, she demonstrated that strength and compassion could coexist. That the girl sold for silver had grown into a queen who could wield both power and mercy. The city began to flourish under her guidance. Trade increased, alliances strengthened, and the people looked to her, not with fear, but with admiration. Ilara's name became synonymous with wisdom and strength, whispered in awe across streets, markets, and courts alike. And yet, despite her victories, Ilara knew that challenges would always come. The world beyond the city was vast, filled with those who would test her rule, who would seek to undermine the stability she had worked so hard to create. But she no longer feared them. She had faced betrayal, hardship, and cruelty, and had emerged stronger, wiser, and ready to confront whatever lay ahead. One evening, as she stood at the balcony of her palace, the moonlight casting a silver glow across her face, Sir Kale approached her quietly. "Do you ever wonder if the city will ever truly be safe?" he asked, his voice tinged with concern. Ilara looked out over the rooftops, the wind tugging gently at her cloak. "Safety is never absolute," she said softly. "But we can shape the world with our choices. We can guide it with wisdom, protect it with courage, and strengthen it with understanding. That is what makes us strong." Sir Kale nodded, his eyes reflecting the same determination and hope that burned in her heart. They stood together in silence, feeling the pulse of the city, the rhythm of life and destiny intertwined. In that moment, the bond between them was unspoken but undeniable. A connection forged in struggle, tempered by respect, and deepened by shared purpose. As the night deepened, a quiet ripple passed through the city. Somewhere in the distance, a shadow moved, watching, waiting. Ilara's journey was far from over, and the currents of destiny would continue to challenge her. But she was no longer the girl sold for silver. She was the Alpha Queen, a leader, a strategist, and a force of change. And she was ready for whatever the world would bring. In the quiet of the night, she whispered to herself, a vow wrapped in strength and hope. "I have claimed my destiny. I have risen above the past, and I will lead, not with fear, but with the strength that comes from understanding and courage." The moon shone brighter, as if acknowledging her words, and somewhere in the shadows, those who had once underestimated her began to realize that the Alpha Queen was no longer a story whispered in fear. She was a living force, and the city, the world, and even her own heart would never be the same.